Today on the podcast, we have Pastor Donny Abbott. Donny is our executive pastor at Timberline Church. And in this episode, we sit down to talk about his story, his family, and how he became a pastor at all in the first place. And then specifically how he got to Timberline. We talk some about him being an author, what contentment has looked like for him. And it's a great conversation. You know, Donny is humble. He is a servant who loves us really well. And I'm really excited for you to hear our conversation with Pastor Donny.
You're listening to the Let Love Live podcast, where we have conversations about how God meets and transforms us,
and how we then let love live in our everyday lives. I'm Mackenzie Matthews.
And I'm Felix Ariano.
Well, hi, everybody. Donny, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mac. Thanks for having me. Hi, Felix.
Hey, Donny.
We're excited to have you. Want you to share for people that don't know you. I mean, a lot of our people know you. You're a big deal around these parts.
Oh,
but
stop.
But for people who maybe don't know you, can you just give us a little snapshot of you and your family?
Yep. So I have been on staff here at Timberline just over 12 years. And I'm married to my wife, Shauna. We've been married over 27 years now. And we have 3 boys. We have Jack, who is 25, and he is going to tomorrow become a Larimer County Sheriff Deputy. Our 19-year-old Owen is at the Navy Nuclear School in Charleston, South Carolina. He's the brainiac among the Abbotts. And then the baby Wyatt, he just turned 17, and he's a sweet, kind soul. He's trying to figure out what he wants to do in life. So, yeah, that's kind of our immediate family. Growing up, I grew up in Anaheim, California, with my mom, my dad, and a younger brother who's a year younger than I, Richie, or we call him Red because he has bright red hair. So that's, yeah, I know. But yeah, so it was just the 4 of us growing up. And growing up, my mom was, I've always called her kind of a passive Christian. My dad was, at that time, a rather vocal atheist and would always make fun of my mom when she would want to take my brother and I to church. And we'd go to church Christmas, Easter, and a handful of other times throughout the year. And I can still hear my dad's voice as we're heading off to church. You know, church is a crutch. The Bible's filled with myths and tall tales. Pastor just wants your money. Can't you think for yourself? All those kind of tropes that he would throw at my mom. But about 10 years before he passed, he was invited by a coworker to a house church. And for whatever reason, my dad decided to go. And it was in that small, intimate house church environment that he gave his life to Christ. And he became a passionate follower of Jesus, just as passionate as he was against Jesus as an atheist. He became a passionate follower of Jesus afterwards. So a true Saul to Paul kind of story.
And how
fascinating.
How old were you at that time?
When he came to faith, so that was 20, 30 years ago. So, you know, I was 35, I would say, somewhere around there.
Were you a pastor at that time?
I was, yeah. So I would guess that I had some influence on his life because we did live together for a short season when we lived in Palm Desert, California. So I have to believe that some of my influence rubbed off on him, but what really put him over the top was his coworker just ministering to him.
How much of your childhood would have been in Orange County?
So I born and raised there, and then when I was 19, I went into the Army. So I always wanted to be a professional baseball player. That was my path. I was always a really good baseball player, and I ended up getting cut in college, and I had no idea what to do. And I was completely directionless And my dad was an Air Force veteran, and he said, well, why don't you go in the military and try to figure things out? So off into the Army I went, did my 4-year tour as a paratrooper airborne mechanic, heavy equipment mechanic. I found out that I was not good at either one of those endeavors. But upon being honorably discharged from the Army, I moved back to Palm Desert. So growing up in Orange County in 19 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, Orange County is a happening place. So did you ever get to run into celebrities?
Well, it wasn't until we would oftentimes go out to the desert, to Palm Springs, because we had some family connections out there. And we ran into some celebrities out there. Frank Sinatra, there was Elvis sighting, John Wayne. My aunt ran down the street to get an autograph from John Wayne. I remember Bob Hope's house being built high up on the hill. And so, yeah, those kind of things. Bob Hope's mom lived across the street from a house that we would stay at. So, yeah, those kind of things.
How did you go, how did you decide to become a pastor? What was the journey to can you share some of being from the kid that's not sure what he wants to do to then going into ministry? Did you feel some sort of calling to ministry? Or
no calling. I actually don't like that word calling when it comes to ministry. I had zero. Becoming a pastor was nowhere in my universe. Let's just put it that way. I was going to say radar. No, not in my universe at all to be a pastor. So upon moving out to Palm Desert, I met up with a guy named Dan Kenley. And Dan and his brother Smiley owned the largest pool maintenance company in the entire Coachella Valley. And I went to work for Dan. And come to find out, Dan was an elder or a deacon at the largest church in the Coachella Valley, Southwest Church. And Dan would invite me to go to church with him. And one day I took him up on his offer and went to church and completely changed my life. I got plugged into volunteering in children's ministry and student ministry. I was even on the parking lot team. I mean, I was just doing everything. So that was kind of my start. And at that time, I had my own pool maintenance company. And after about 5 or 6 years, I decided to sell it to go become a corporate pilot. So I wanted to go learn how to fly airplanes. I thought that was a super sexy job, a lot of fun. And just a couple of weeks before I was going to head off to an aeronautical school, both Dan and the children's pastor at the time, Brent Phillips, they both cornered me and said, Donny, we really don't think you should be a glorified taxi driver. So we think you should come on staff at church. So I started out as a summer intern, and that turned into a part-time gig, and then full-time. I became a pastor there at Southwest. I went to my undergrad was at Biola University, so a small Christian school there in Southern California. And then over the years, I went to seminary at Multnomah Seminary in Portland, Oregon. So that was kind of my start in ministry. It was just kind of a gradual progression where people saw giftings in me that I didn't see in myself.
And your going into ministry, was it through the avenue of children's ministry?
It was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. So I had been in children's ministry. I've been in ministry 30 years this year. Been a pastor 30 years.
Wow.
And for, I would guess, 22, 23 of those years was children's ministry, including 8 years as the children's pastor here at Timberline Church.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sharing a little bit of the story about how you're in Palm Desert, you get on staff. I mean, you mentioned you were in Portland. I know you were in Texas. And then can you share some of, I guess, the journey of when you would feel like God would move you from place to place? Can you share just briefly some of that as you move from those different churches, but then also how God brought you guys here?
Yeah, so a lot of those moves were really driven by my lack of contentment. And I hate to admit that, but it's true, is that I always thought that there was something better for me. So I was striving for the next thing, the next position. And those would come up for sure. But what it meant, it's hard on a family to move every 4 or 5 years. And so we did that until 12 years ago when we moved out here. And at that time, I had just graduated from seminary. So spent 3.5 years in seminary there in Portland. I was part-time on a staff at a church there as a care pastor. And upon graduating from seminary, the whole reason why I went to seminary was actually to get out of children's ministry. And I had set my sights on becoming a senior pastor. And I just felt like the best way to do that was to have a seminary degree. So that's what I did and graduated with a Master of Arts in Pastoral Studies, so kind of an MDiv light, and spent a year applying at different senior pastor positions, and we'd get some interviews, but nothing panned out. And we were poor. I mean, we had no money. And I finally told my wife one day, I said, I think I'm going to have to go back into children's ministry. And so I went to a website, a headhunting site, found Timberline's children's pastor vacant position, applied, and 6 months later, we were here. Yeah.
I want to ask the statement you threw in there. I'm like, that's the contentment piece of you saying, oh, your lack of contentment in the places that you were in. Sometimes I think that like setting your sights on other things, like that's like drive, that's rewarded. That's like, oh, there's something that's a positive thing. Like, oh, you were driven. Would you have been able to identify at the time that there was that, were you like, oh, I'm just driven, this is a good thing? Or were you able now looking back to see, oh, there was like actually a restlessness in me? Like, did you have self-awareness then about that?
Yeah, I did not have self-awareness. It was exactly what you described. I was driven. I just thought this is the next thing for me. And I didn't give as much consideration to how did my wife feel about this? And I have 3 boys at the time. How did they feel about being uprooted yet again? So we just kind of determined once we landed here in Colorado that we're going to see our kids through high school before we make any other moves. So yeah, lack of contentment, that's been a really deep personal learning thing I've had to learn over particularly the last 15 years, I would say, to where I feel very content and have really found contentment since arriving here in Colorado. So, yeah.
How did you discover contentment?
Yeah, I just think, I think a lot of those moves were not necessarily God-driven, but were more self-driven. And the contentment that I found here at Timberline is truly feeling like God has me exactly where he wants me and my family. The move here was really good for us. Moving here was painful, particularly for my wife and for our then 13-year-old, our oldest. They both had deep friendship groups, and to uproot them to come out here it wasn't the best season of transition. And my wife, she would nod her head in agreement. But now looking back, I think it was really a God ordained move to come out here. And then, in my current role as the executive pastor here at Timberline, that was, I've always said that there's 3 roles in a church that I would never do. A women's pastor, a worship pastor, and the executive pastor. Would never do those. Had zero desire for any of those. In fact, I've been the executive pastor here for 2 years. I think just over 2 years. And for an entire year, our then executive pastor, Jeff Lucas, he approached me 5 times over the course of the year and said, Donny, I really would like you to be the executive pastor here. Will you consider it? And each time I said, Jeff, I have zero interest in that position.
Wow.
And now here I am.
It's hilarious. I mean, it's an interesting arc in your story in even sharing like the drive, next thing, get the degree to the next thing so I don't have to do children's ministry anymore, to then come to Timberline to say, I found contentment at Timberline in children's ministry.
Yeah, very much so. I found when we came here to Timberline, I don't want to say the children's ministry was broken. It wasn't broken, but there was a lot of opportunity for me to use my gifts, talents, experience here at Timberline in the children's ministry. And I think that I have made some really good improvements and changes over the 8 years that I was the children's pastor here. So in that, just being valued. So it's not about drive, but it's more about, here's the opportunity for me to step in, use my giftings to impact people. And I think that I've done that here.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I like to say yes, because
Thanks,
my
Felix.
experience coming on staff at Timberline Church as an elementary director at the time under your leadership, it was life-saving for me. It was such a wonderful experience to be under your leadership. So I'm grateful that more people get to experience what I was experiencing, keeping it all to myself after being under you. But you created a very healthy and special place for people like myself to thrive. I'd love to know your experience at Timberline. I feel it's a unique culture. And how is that culture on you?
Yeah, we do. I feel like we have a really good culture here at Timberline. I think we have a really, I've been on staff at 5 different churches, and I've always said that Timberline, in my opinion, is the healthiest church staff that I've been a part of. And I think it really stems from the people that are on our staff. We currently have 83 people on staff, and I think you guys could both attest that we have a great bunch of people who are really good at what they do. But more than that, I think what makes us unique is the collaborative approach that many of us have here at Timberline. It makes for a really healthy environment. I mean, just the 3 of us will often, almost on the daily, will interact with one another and get feedback from one another on things that we're working on. If it's sermon prep or writing a blog or whatever, we do that a lot. And not just the 3 of us, but we could count probably 24 other people on staff that we work closely with. And there's just a lot of that I think helps to make Timberline a unique and healthy work environment.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask Felix a question, if that's okay, because you've been on staff at several churches too, or I've heard you say that, like that Timberline's a healthy church culture.
Yeah.
How many churches have you worked for?
So this would be my 3rd. So I had 2 different experiences before this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yay, look at us. It's the only church I've ever worked for, so this is great. I want to hear a little bit of, God's leading in your story and the wrestling that you had of being like, okay, here's the drive. Or there's so much in that feels like redemption in a lot of ways, hearing that of like what you maybe idolize. I don't know if I could use that word, to then the way that God ended up using that. But I'd love to hear some of how you look back, particularly over your ministry experience, and how you felt like God had met you and led you, or times I know you had one instance at a church that you really thought, you're like, yeah, this is totally this is a total God thing. He's working this together for me. And it wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
Like, can you share some of how have you followed God's leading in your story? And when you look back, how that affects you?
Yeah, I think the one instance that you're talking about was I was on staff at the first church in the desert Southwest, and we were Shauna and I. We had been married just about 4 or 5 years at that time. In fact, Jack was just a little guy. He was about 2. And we were looking to get out of the desert. My wife was born there and spent a good chunk of her childhood there. And we were both looking to get out of the heat. The heat is just, man, can be so oppressive. So at that time, we had lived out there for quite a while, and we're looking for cooler environments. And we were looking up into the Northwest. And eventually we did end up there on staff. But we were going to vacation to Lake Tahoe, which is where my wife's grandmother lived. She lived in South Lake Tahoe. And we were headed up there, the 3 of us, for a vacation. But prior to leaving the desert, I had a quick coffee with a colleague of mine and told him about my interest in pursuing other ministry opportunities. And he told me about a position in Reno. And that came across his desk. And I said, okay, that sounds great. So we had our coffee and we parted ways. The Abbotts, we head up to Lake Tahoe. And a couple of days later, we're at Zephyr Cove. Zephyr Cove is a really cool, family-friendly beach, has shallow water. So I'm sitting in my beach chair on the beach, and Jack is just frolicking in the water, doing his thing. And off to my left, I see 3 people walking into view. And one of those persons is obviously a camera person. He's got a tripod. He's got a bag. It's obviously camera stuff. And then the other guy is like a sound guy. He's got headphones on. And then there was a guy who didn't have anything. He was obviously the guy who was going to be on camera. So they set up directly in front of me. I'm not kidding. I'm 20 feet away from this scene that's unfolding in front of me. And the guy on camera, as they start rolling, he says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm the senior pastor at such and such a church in Reno." And that was exactly the church that my colleague had told me about. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, if this is not a God-ordained thing, I don't know what is. So I let them finish their rolling, and after they're starting to pack up, I go to the senior pastor on camera, and I said, excuse me, you're not going to believe this, but I think we're supposed to meet. And I tell him the story, and he says, "Oh yeah, all this small talk. Nice to meet you and everything. Here's my executive pastor's number. Give him a call." So of course I give that guy a call and leave him a message, and I'm still waiting for him to call back to this day. So the point is that I used to always put a lot of emphasis on God working through circumstances, and obviously God can and does circumstantially work in the lives of people, but we can't put all of our eggs in that basket. We have to also lean on how else does God lead? Well, he leads through his word, through prayer, through discernment and wisdom of other people and circumstances. So
was that a disheartening?
Very much so. I couldn't believe it. That's a slam dunk. I mean, Lake Tahoe is a massive lake. At summertime, there's tens of thousands of people. What are the odds of that happening? I mean, it was, I just couldn't believe it. I'm still a little perturbed about it.
What did happen? Yeah. I left asking. Yeah.
So you're also an author.
Yes. Yeah. Very much a starving author. Yeah.
I know some fun stories that I'm like, I sort of want you to share with our people about the journey that you went on to release those books into the world. Can you share first about your books and then about that journey of how did you release them?
Yeah. So I've released 2 books. Both of them were released in 2021, and that was an interesting year because that was the year my mom died. She died in January of that year, and then both of the books I released that year as well. So I've written a children's picture book, Stanley the Claustrophobic Miner, and
Are you going to sing the song?
I will not do that.
Oh,
That'll hurt people's ears.
Claustrophobic miner.
A trapped 49er, 200 feet below. Wish I didn't have these fears. That's why I wear all these mirrors to make the mind grow. So there you go.
Beautiful. Great job. Good job, Mackenzie, to get it out of him.
I know, I forced him.
Well, so Stanley was actually a script that I wrote for a vacation Bible school about 1997, and Stanley was simply a character in that cast of VBS characters. And he was a really lovable, endearing character. The kids just loved him. And I decided to take Stanley and turn him into a book. And so I wrote the book 25 years ago and promptly put it on the bookshelf until I moved out here to Colorado. I decided to pick up Stanley, that manuscript again, sent it off to an editor, and she polished it. And then I hired a illustrator, and that can be quite pricey. Fortunately, it was a friend of mine, a former coworker here at Timberline, Bethy Tell. She just does great graphic artwork, and she was the graphic artist for Stanley. But it costs a lot of money, and I don't have a lot of money as a children's pastor, so I set about mucking horse stalls. So for an entire year, I mucked horse stalls.
What does it mean to muck something? What does that mean?
Well, to put it politely, you're scooping horse poop. You're cleaning up horse poop.
Thank you for asking, Mackenzie.
I mean, yeah.
Did you know that? Did you know what that meant?
Yeah, you can put the dots together.
Yes, but did you know?
Well, I didn't know that Donny was doing that.
But you know what mucking a horse stall was.
Yes, but because I would have been a elementary director at that time.
Yes, yep.
So working in close proximity to you, and I did not even know that.
Yeah, for 6 a.m., I'd go down to the horse stable. They had 5 horses. One of them was a big thoroughbred. She was massive, just beautiful horses. And for an hour to 2 hours, I'd muck horse stalls and did that for a year to save money to pay for illustrating Stanley. And then also, any funeral that I would do, any honorarium I would receive, I would apply that to Stanley as well. So there you go.
Well,
so that's Stanley. And then I also wrote kind of a spiritual formation book called Christ in the Storm, and that is based off of a Rembrandt painting of the same title, Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee. So that book is a really short, easy read, and it's basically my Visio Divina based off of me looking at that painting. And so that book is really dear to me also. It was about 2 years to write that. And I'm really proud of both of them. So.
I want to come back to the book that's inspired by a painting. There's something there we want to lean into. But before I go there, you're explaining an incredible work ethic. And I know you're also the only one on staff that's a veteran. How has the military shaped you as a pastor?
Yeah, so what I tell aspiring writers is that you need to show up to write every single day. And it has to be the number one thing in your life to get this book writing project finished. Everything else has to be secondary. And that's what it was for me for 2 years. I was going to do whatever it took to finish these books. And that included, mucking horse stalls. But also, I think I'm a pretty disciplined person, and that comes from the military. I'm usually up every morning between 4 and 5. This morning was 4:22. And, I have the same morning routine. But when I was in the writing routine, it was the same. 5 o'clock, I'm at my desk in my office, and I'm staring at the computer, waiting for inspiration to happen. And I think that's literally half of the writing ethic, is simply showing up every day and putting pen to paper, even if it's 100 words. It's 100 words more than you had yesterday. So yeah, and a lot of that stems from, I played football and baseball all growing up, and so there's a lot of discipline and practice and preparing for games. But then when I went in the Army, there's obviously a very regimented system they have in the military. So I think all of that has served me well when it comes to writing, and just I think my work ethic is pretty good. I love my work, and here at Timberline, when we moved here, I think I've told you, Felix, several times, I determined that I was going to say yes to as many things as I possibly could, particularly those things that were asked of me, because I wanted people to know that I was more than just a children's pastor. And I feel like that approach has served me well.
It's beautiful. You've proven that.
Yeah.
I know our listeners would love to say thank you for your service.
Oh, yeah.
I'd be remiss not to say that.
Well, thanks.
So where did you find this natural, appreciation for art that would eventually begin to guide some of your spiritual formation? Like you mentioned, a term that might be lost on many people. Can you say that term one more time?
Visio Divina.
Okay, so what is that? And then after that, how did you discover your attraction to art, and then that it could be a spiritual practice?
Yeah, so mainly, Lectio Divina, so these are all Latin terms. Lectio Divina is a spiritual practice of reading a passage of Scripture several times over and just kind of marinating in what God's Word is saying to you, and taking time to rest in a particular passage. So that's Lectio Divina. And then the same can be applied to Visio Divina. So just simply visually looking at something that, God is the great creator, right? And looking at great works of art and great artists throughout history, many of them were Christ followers themselves, and thereby the works that they produced were religious type works. And Christ is probably the most prominently painted figure in all of history. So there's something to that. So for us to practice Lectio Divina is simply looking at a work of art, such as Rembrandt's Christ in the Storm. And there's a lot happening in that painting with all of the different characters that are on the boat with Christ and in this tumultuous storm. So I spent a great deal of time just staring at that painting and just trying to immerse myself in the scene. So basically that's what it is. And just seeing, how does God speaking to me through this work of art? That could be a sculpture or, any kind of work of art. God can speak to us through that. So and then going back, I'm not an art connoisseur by any means. I'm just kind of an average guy who enjoys different periods of art, different artists. And I've kind of always had that, and have really gravitated toward the Renaissance time period. I do like Impressionist artists as well. And Mac, sitting here, is very much an artist herself. So I feel kind of, I don't feel very educated sitting next to you talking about art, but it is fun. It's just a fun endeavor for me.
Mm-hmm.
as a bonus, can we do like a rapid fire just for users of social media?
Ooh,
Rapid fire.
Rapid
rapid
Are you
fire
ready?
with
Rapid
Donnie.
fire.
That's a great idea for
This
social.
is bonus.
Okay.
This is bonus podcast. Rapid fire. So you have a question. You can't spend a lot of time on it. Answer and then to the next one.
Fun.
Okay. Favorite Elvis song?
I can't help falling in love.
What got you into Elvis?
My mom.
Who is responsible for your fresh haircut?
Elvis.
And who cuts it for you?
What's that?
Who cuts it for you?
The same girl who's cut my hair for 12 years. I won't let anyone else touch my hair. Sammy Donaldson.
Very nice.
Yep.
Favorite book and why?
Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen.
And why is that? Why is that one special?
Just because Nouwen he practiced Visio Divina. He went to St. Petersburg, Russia, where that painting is housed. And he sat in front of that painting after hours for like 4 or 5 hours.
Wow.
And was just wowed by that. First of all, it's an enormous painting. It's like 12, 15 feet tall. So massive work of art. And so I just think there's something to that story and the way Rembrandt depicts it that just, man, you can really identify with at least one of the characters in the painting.
Okay, so The Prodigal Son, that's your favorite book. So it goes into the next question. What is your favorite artist or painter?
I would say Rembrandt.
Hands down.
Yeah.
Okay, that was an obvious one.
Yeah, he's just a master when it comes to the use of color. And of course, Rembrandt painted a lot of paintings around biblical scenes. So he just brings those to life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Failure that taught you a life lesson.
Oh boy, Felix, that's deep.
I was thinking about the car.
I mean, I have the old truck.
Yeah, I thought that would be one of them.
Oh yeah. Do you want me to tell that story?
Oh, it has to be rapid fire. Well, do this
rapid
version.
fire.
This version is a short one.
I don't think you understand rapid fire.
Yeah,
It's supposed to be
failure.
fast, Donnie.
I'm sorry?
You're chatting a lot about this rapid fire.
I had a 1954 Chevy pickup that I had back in Fort Bragg. Bought it in California. My dad and I drove it across country. And that was a super healing process between my dad and I relationally, because growing up, I couldn't stand my dad. But that road trip, that was very healing. Wow. To spend 4 or 5 days together. So anyway, I had this great old classic pickup. I put it in different car shows. It was my baby. I love that truck. And I'm about to get out of the Army and had some major engine problems with the truck to the point that I actually had to tow it back to California. So I drove that back to California. And at the time, I had a close family member who worked at a speed shop, just a really high-end auto restoration, hot rod kind of shop there in Orange County. And the Army gave me $3,000 to exit the Army. So I had a broken old truck, $3,000 check, a family member who worked in this speed shop. And I'm like, this is perfect. So I gave him the keys to the truck, all of the money. And he said, I'll get your truck fixed for you, and I'll be back to you in a month. Well, 6 months later, I still did not have the truck. And probably a year after that, the next time I saw my truck, it was literally in pieces in a basement of an Anaheim warehouse. The engine, transmission, hood, front fenders were all in the bed of the truck. And what I didn't know, but at the time, was this family member had a cocaine habit. So he took my $3,000, put it up his nose, and never put my truck back together again. So a lot of lessons learned there.
What was the lesson?
Be more thoughtful when it comes to giving money to people, and really follow through, like check up on how are things going. I should have been more diligent there. like go down to the shop and look at him working at the truck,
That's
those
good.
kind of things. So,
Well, pick up the pace. Coffee or tea?
oh, tea, definitely. I don't drink coffee.
Mountains or ocean?
Mountains.
And then do you have a life message or a life verse?
My life verse is Romans 12:2. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Come on now.
Let's go.
Love it.
Preach.
Thank you, Pastor Donny.
Well, we end all of our interviews the same way by asking what feels hopeful to you right now. Now, this could be anything. Could be really small, like, summer is coming. That's hopeful to me. Could too as big as, the restoration of the last day. Like, you can say whatever you would like when it comes to Donny Abbott. What to you feels hopeful right now?
A lot of hope in my world right now, particularly as I mentioned with my family. My wife, she too is on staff here, and she's just kind of in a sweet spot with her gifts and talents. So I'm hopeful about our church and our church community gleaning her gifts and talents. And then, as I mentioned, the three boys, Jack and Owen, they're both on their career paths in law enforcement and in the military. And even Wyatt in getting his GED, that's such a big accomplishment for someone that the typical school system hasn't served so well. And so he's just got a different path, and he's a really good, sweet, kind kid who's going to do great in life. And so personally, that's what I'm hopeful about. And then here at Timberline, man, we're about to hire a new senior pastor here, and hopefully in the next month or so. And man, the sky's the limit here at Timberline. So that's what I'm hopeful for. Yep.
Well, I know a lot of people know you, but we just so appreciate the role that you've been in, it's funny, the story of your reluctance to even take this leadership position, to be in the interim the way that you are, but really to get to work with you. It's like working with a friend for me. It's like very fun to get to work with you, to collaborate with you. Or we always joke because we're creatively, I'll be like, you push me too fast. You can do it, or like us like collaborating, but it's been fun. Like, it's a gift to have you around. And you mentioned this when you were like, I just determined to say yes to whatever was coming, because you are, when I think of you, I'm like, you are like the king of yes man. Like, absolutely, something needs to be done. Someone needs something covered. You're always the one that you beat everybody to the punch to help somebody else out. But I also think that has been a huge player in the culture that we have, where we all follow you. We're following that to be like, well, I want to beat Donny to say yes, or I want to follow in that same way, that we become a collaborative team because you are a collaborative leader, or you're the person that's like stepping first to do that. And so just know that.
Well, thanks, man.
I really appreciate that.
It means a lot. Thank you. So good to be with you, Mac, and you, Felix. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Donny. Isn't Donny the best? We love him, and we love to interview him. Anything we talked about is going to be linked in the show notes if you want to check that out. And we will be back next week with another little series that we're doing, interviewing our pastors. Next week, you'll get to hear Pastor Felix sit down with my husband, Pastor Justin, or J-Matt, as he's called. You won't want to miss that. And then we also have Pastor Brent Cunningham and more people coming in the lineup. So thank you again for listening, for subscribing, for sharing this with a friend. It's really, really helpful to the podcast. But appreciate you, and we'll see you soon.